So today we're taking a look at a book on old school judo groundwork. Hi guys, my name is Joe, and welcome to my channel, Fighting Words, the Martial Arts Library. And on this channel, I review martial arts books, and I talk about other martial arts related subjects. Today I'm going to be reviewing Higher Judo Groundwork from 1952. The author of this book was Moshe Feldenkrais, which I'm probably butchering, so apologies in advance. Now, Mr. Feldenkrais was these days he's most known for developing the Feldenkrais method, which is sort of alternative medicine practice based on proprioception. I'm probably explaining it poorly, but a little of that actually starts to show up in this book. He was also a practitioner of traditional jiu-jitsu and also a judo black belt. He was born in the Ukraine when it was still the Russian Empire. Then he moved to France, and then when the Nazis got there during World War II, he found himself he escaped to England and helped with their war effort. He actually has a book on combatives that's largely based around getting behind the guy and putting him in a chokehold. Eventually he found himself, well, I keep saying he found himself. Eventually he moved to the, at that time, new country of Israel. So quite a life, this gentleman. This book focuses on the groundwork of judo from the period just following World War II. And again, he originally had a background in traditional jiu-jitsu. There was a lot of crossover in the early days between judo and traditional jiu-jitsu. So I'm wondering how much of that influenced some of the stuff that we see here. This book really seems to try to catalog different means of approaching an opponent on the ground, or if you happen to be the guy on the ground, what defensive options you have based on different positions you find yourself in. Now, the book begins by going to great lengths to talk about the human relationship to things like posture and falling and gravity. And he sort of forwards this idea that once we are okay with the idea of falling, that we gain a certain amount of maturity. And he also connects the ideas of, if you are more mature, it means you are better able to learn things. So we're seeing that he's really thinking hard about this concept of, not just here's how to break your fall, but what effect it actually has on the human psyche, which is interesting. And I don't know if I will, but I feel partly inspired to, maybe read selections from that book just out loud to give you guys an idea. Not in this video, but I think it's some interesting ideas. Once we get past that, and that does include a huge chunk of the book at the beginning, we get into the concepts of pinning and escaping. So the idea of where to distribute your weight. And after that, we get into different ground movement exercises. People who studied Ne-Waza groundwork will be familiar with a lot of this today. So there's things like, shelling up to keep someone from, being able to press their body against yours. There's, of course, things like rolling, what we could call hip heists, bridging, which is also another common method to prevent pinning. So, a lot of the standard stuff gets covered. Following that, we get a chapter on how to find oneself in groundwork. A lot of judo books will focus on throws and trying to get a good clean throw, because under the judo competition rules, if you get a clean throw, you win the match. Well, in this book, he's focusing more on things like sacrifice throws, or pulling the guy down and attacking with a juji gatame. His objective with the throws is to begin the groundwork, which is really interesting to me, especially in comparison to, as I mentioned, many of the other judo books at the time, or even today. Now, when it comes to the groundwork, the Ne-Waza, one thing that he really divides the different approaches into is, again, how you approach the opponent. So, the chapters are divided into things like approaching head-on, approaching astride the opponent. We also get his approach divided into whether or not the opponent is face up or face down. So we begin with the 6 o'clock approach. So the 6 o'clock approach, if you think of a clock face, your head is at 12, your feet are at 6. So the 6 o'clock approach is approaching someone head on into what would essentially be their open guard. He does cover some basic guard positioning. He starts off talking about the attacks from the point of view of the person on top, the person approaching the bottom person. And he begins with some very rudimentary guard passing. He also includes some leg locks. I would say, notably, he uses a calf squeeze. It looks like a straight ankle lock or an Achilles lock. I hate that term, because if you do it right, you're going to break the ankle, not lock the Achilles. But it's interesting that he really emphasizes going between the Achilles and the calf, like where the calf muscle begins, and just squeezing that, or applying pressure to that in an effort to make the opponent quit. He will also include variations of what we could call the Boston Crab. These are sort of leg locks, but also spine stretches. He will do this both after having captured both legs, but also having captured a single leg. In this chapter, you will also get what we might call variations of toe holds. I'm using the term as it's applied in catch-as-catch-can wrestling. A toe hold is any hold where you're grabbing the guy's toes. You're not necessarily twisting the toes. But you can use a grip on the toes to apply pressure to both the ankles and the knees, depending on how you're choosing to attack. When it comes to the bottom player from the 6 o'clock position, he starts off talking about the dojime, which is a judo technique where you just squeeze the guy's trunks with your legs, a body scissors. It's not currently allowed in competition, but he includes it here. He will also include some choking techniques with the legs, including kind of scissors chokes. Again, sort of scissoring the guy's neck with your legs. He has a triangle variation, but it might be seen as a wrong side triangle. So in the standard triangle choke, the leg that's being folded around your neck is on the opposite side of the arm that's trapped. What he is showing, the arm that's being folded around the neck is on the same side of the arm that's being trapped. He will also show, I'm just going to call them kick downs. I guess you could think of them as sort of like open guard sweeps against a standing opponent. But, hooking his standing attacker's legs and pushing against his knees. He also has some turnovers, things that look like what we would call butterfly sweeps, for instance. The next chapter we see approaches from the right and the left. So again, the attacker's down, and you happen to approach him from, last time we used the term 6 o'clock, let's say the 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock angles. And this is very submission heavy, especially for the top player. We get a number of arm locks, primarily the straight arm lock variations. We also get a number of chokes, primarily with the gi. You also actually get some a knee on belly position. It's interesting to me that he seems to think that this is super dangerous and that you could press the breastbone into the heart. He seems to indicate that. Maybe. I mean, it's a great position to just wear somebody out in and just make them utterly miserable before attacking with something else. But I'm skeptical that it is as dangerous as he is presenting here, that there's some danger of applying pressure to the heart itself. Bottom player in this case gets a few reversals. This includes some sort of surprise chokes and locks from the bottom. Somebody's pinning you, push their hit away, trap it with your legs, and then, apply an arm lock on the arm as it gets stretched away from them, stuff like that. After that, we get the head-on position. The head-on position, as it's described here, is the attacker begins on his back, but a lot of what's shown here are attacks when the guy sits up or you pull him into a sitting position. So a lot of chokes from the back, with the arms, with the legs, utilizing his gi. There's a lot of that in this chapter. You also get pins and some chokes from what we would call the north-south position. You can win in judo by pinning someone to the mat for X amount of time. It has changed over the years. You also get some attacks from the bottom, primarily in the form of a head scissors style of choke, and you also get a few reversals. After that, we get the astride position, which is mount, basically, including standing mount, the feet on either side of the guy. Mostly this is actually showing attacks from the bottom, primarily in the form of leg locks. There are also a few turnovers here. From the top position, you get, obviously your standard array of chokes. You also get some neck cranks, among other things, what we would call the can opener from this position. And also a lot of Jujikatame variations, the falling straight arm bar. Then we get into a section where the opponent is facing the ground, so turtled up, basically. This chapter really doesn't have anything from the bottom position. It really focuses on offense from the top. Mostly we see chokes. There are a few turnovers being shown here. Neck locks, again, make an appearance. A lot of pulling back on the head or twisting the head. I say a lot. It's a couple instances. But they show up. He will also show chokes utilizing the lower leg. Bracing the calf or the shin against the guy's neck and grabbing your own leg and, using your forearm and lower leg to apply chokes. Although he does mention that these are perhaps more amusing than useful. So I guess this is the sort of stuff you do to white belts. I appreciate that he added them for academic purposes, that, here's a thing that you can do. And I also appreciate that he pointed out maybe they aren't the best option. Something also of note here, some of you who are more familiar with judo rules have probably noticed that a lot of the things that I've been talking about, like the neck cranks and dojime, the scissors lock around the body, these things are not legal in modern competition judo. He doesn't really mention a whole lot in the way of rules. He does mention that in some clubs, some of this stuff isn't allowed. So, as I mentioned earlier, there was a lot of crossover between judo and classic jiu-jitsu at the time or earlier in the 20th century. So I'm wondering if that was sort of, if that had an influence on the techniques that he's showing, that, several of which were not in competition judo even by that point. But it is notable that he doesn't actually go in depth. He doesn't really reference rules when he's talking about this. As far as the pros go, I like the variety of this. I'll say that up front. You get a lot of different attacking options from a lot of different positions, in addition to things like turnovers. By attacking, I'm primarily talking about chokes and locks. But you also get, turnovers and principles of how to pin and how to escape. So when it comes to groundwork, it covers a lot of area. I also like that it includes quite a variety of strangles, especially the gi techniques. So that would be something good to have for that sort of input of, look at all these different varieties of gi chokes. Try this one out. Try that one out. Yeah, and just some of the underlying principles. I think some of the more interesting principles at the beginning are at least worth a look. And I think definitely the principles when it comes to movement on the ground, pinning, escaping, I think all of that's valuable too. A pro that I don't have on my little notepad over here. If you are a fan of the Tao of Jeet Kune Do, when I was reading through this, it became pretty obvious that, some of the things that show up in the Tao of Jeet Kune Do, like the double leg locks and stuff like that, probably had their origins here. And I actually just checked with my copy of Who Wrote the Tao, and yeah, Bruce Lee, in the Tao of Jeet Kune Do, some of the techniques that are shown here show up there, because it was taken from Bruce Lee's notes after he had died. Anyway. As far as the cons go, a lot of the 6 o'clock stuff, the guard passing and the leg locks are, by modern standards, primitive. Today when we are passing guard by sliding our knee over the top of the guy's thigh, we tend to, create a movement where we keep his leg pinned with our other leg as we slide that first leg through. He's not showing that. That's a way in modern groundwork that you would find yourself trapped in half guard. The leg locks, again, just the emphasis on I'm creating pressure on his calf. That's a pain move. Pain can be ignored. You're not breaking anything with that. I think it's interesting to look at, but that particular section is something I probably would ignore. I should also say that the level of the description of the techniques is inconsistent. Some things get a lot of description in what you're doing, and other things are like, look at this picture. See what he's doing in that picture? Okay, moving on. So I would have appreciated if everything got the same detail all the way across, because he is capable as an author of great detail with some of those stuff in here. So, recommendations. If you are a fan of old school judo, I think this is a good historical look at things. If you are newish to grappling and you really want to go in depth in your exploration of gi chokes, this is a good opportunity for that. Just has a good variety of groundwork in general. Some of it, again, we have better techniques than what he was showing then. You know, that's the nature of something that gets tested all the time. You're going to develop better and better stuff for those same situations. Um, yeah, it's not bad. It really isn't great for modern competition judo. I would not say that it is great for modern competition jiu-jitsu when it comes to things like guard passes and leg locks. But again, I got to praise the variety and the amount of chokes in here. I think that really stood out. And again, sort of the principles of pinning and escaping. You know, there may be better sources for that, but this is still a pretty good source, especially for its time. Like me, you may be able to find it online in digital form. So if it doesn't cost you anything, you have any interest in groundwork at all, pick it up. And yeah, I'll also throw in that the part at the beginning where he is describing the effects of, you know, posture and learning to fall and gravity and all that on the human psyche. I think it's interesting enough to take a look at. It might be your flavor, it might not, but I should at least mention that I find it interesting, and you may too. So that's all I have for this week, and I appreciate you watching. Please stay tuned for my next one. Thank you.